All right, so I'm going to solve everybody's problems right now. And by everybody, I mean like a handful of people. We're going to talk about the Paul brothers. We're going to talk about the fact that the Anderson Silva fight bombed with the pay-per-view. Talk about what's coming next for Jake Paul. We got Nate Diaz in this conversation. We've got Logan Paul. We've got Andrew Tate, okay? Now, one thing that I love to do is to play what would happen in a perfect world, right? And sometimes when what would happen in a perfect world leads to, the answer for everybody involved is lots and lots of money, like lots and lots of money, and like the most money for each party involved. A lot of times there's a chance that actually happens, right? I think if you guys listen to my stuff consistently, you know that I'm a big believer in like the Freakonomics way of looking at the world, which is just that people are always going to follow their incentive structures. Always. Incentives lead to outcomes. Period. Point blank. Period. If you pay people to stay home, they're not going to work. If people don't go to work, then you're going to have supply chain issues. And the reason for the supply chain issues is because you paid someone not to work, which is the incentive structure. Anyway, I'm beside, just on a tangent. But usually the simplest incentive for human beings is money, and in a lot of cases, sex also. But money primarily when we're talking about business, right? And so when you're looking at a situation where you have two parties like the UFC and Jake Paul, as an example, just a little, pregame where we're going, it looks like an unsolvable problem, right? Like hypothetically, if, Jake wanted to go to the UFC and UFC wanted Jake to come to the UFC, it's like, no. The cuts are too deep. No, they're not. There's always a number. There is always a number. Now, it might not sound like it makes sense yet, but like I said, we got Andrew Tate, Logan Paul, we got Nate Diaz, we got the UFC, we got Jake Paul, we got a big video right now. But before I get into it, I wanted to tell you guys to join the conversation on IRL. That is that's my new chat platform. Anyone who's on IRL already talking to me, put it in the comments. Just confirm. Like, I'm in there. I am talking to people all throughout the day. So if you want to join and you want to talk to me, join the IRL group. The link is in the description. And also, I want to thank Sheath Underwear. I haven't done yet this month. It's only like the second or third or fourth or something like that, and that's usually time where I find myself feeling incredibly grateful to Sheath Underwear, my favorite sponsor, that keeps my package nice and tight when I'm running around. Sheath here, there's here, feels really nice. Anyone who has ever bought Sheath Underwear will attest to that in the comments if you want. But also, you will be doing this channel a great service as well as your twig and berries. So give it a run. Sheathunderwear.com, and you use the promo code FIRE20 for an enormous discount. An enormous discount. That's sheathunderwear.com and FIRE20. Okay, so look. Here is the deal. So, the Jake Paul Anderson Silva fight bombed in the pay-per-view. Okay? Bombed. And I realize I'm saying that kind of like emphasizing it. And I, in a sea of people who hate on Jake Paul, it probably sounds like I'm reveling in the fact that the pay-per-view didn't do well. I'm not at all. And I have said this before and I will say it again. I am very, very confident that the number of people who are streaming these fights is so astronomical that it's hard to even exaggerate. Like, I think, now, there obviously was a lot of people who actually did not see the fight. And the evidence for that is the number of people who were on board with, Jake Paul and the Anderson Silva fight was rigged, Now, there is no one who saw the fight, who actually watched the fight, who thinks the fight's rigged. No one. No one who watched the whole fight thinks it's rigged. Actually, I take that back. John Fitch, he might think it's rigged. I think he sent me a message on, John Fitch is my boy. I think he sent me something on Instagram saying that he did believe it. He's the only credible person on earth who thinks that the fight was rigged that I'm aware of. Okay. So one against everyone else. But nonetheless, and again, I'm not 100% sure he even saw the fight, but for the most part, all these people were running around talking about, the punch missed, the punch missed. Okay. The only way that you could possibly believe that the punch missed is if you didn't watch the fight. Like, there's no one who watched the fight who thinks the punch missed. No one. Because when you watched it not clipped specifically this one little punch and then stuck on Reddit, everyone knew it landed. There was no one, just everyone knew. And when you see it from all the different angles, like, he got clipped, dude. So I'm just using that to kind of point out that, like, yeah, there are a fair number of people who are interested enough in the fight to be talking conspiracy theories who didn't actually watch the fight. But the vast majority of people talking about it, or at least a lot of people, they saw the fight. I think it's, if honest to God, if I was going to guess, I would bet that you're talking 30 to 1. What am I talking about? 30 to 1 would be my guess of how many people watched the fight versus the number of people who paid the pay-per-view. I'm being totally serious about that. I honestly don't think I'm exaggerating. Like, I bet you for every one person who bought the pay-per-view, 30 people watched it streaming. You know, just went to some, you know, crackhead streams or whatever and watched it for free. Now, I want to say this real quick. I'm going to make a confession here. I have streamed one fight before. One fight ever. I never stream fights. I never, ever stream them. I buy them 100% of the time. And it is related to this one. The only fight I ever streamed without buying it was Logan Paul versus Mayweather, and I'll tell you exactly why. And there's also a really funny note about this too. The reason I streamed it is because the Jake Paul-Ben Askren fight was so infuriating. Like, where I bought it to watch fights, and they had all these musical acts running around, where I was like, dude, this is the most ludicrous thing I've ever seen. Like, why do I have to watch 10 celebrities, like, talking in the back, like, oh, Snoop Dogg and Justin Bieber, and then watch 5 musical performances between every single, like, I wanted to lose my mind. Like, I actually felt taken advantage of, even though it was like I paid, and then you showed me something over, like, where, okay, yeah, I want to see the fight, so I'm going to have to sit through this. Like, I don't want to watch musical acts. I was mad enough about that I streamed Mayweather versus Logan Paul, and in fairness, that was such an awesome production. It was done with Showtime, that I felt really guilty, and that's why I'm admitting it right now. And if Logan Paul, if you want $50 from me, I will sit. Just let me know, dude. I will Venmo it to you. Tell Shab, give me your Venmo. I will send you $50. Probably a much bigger cut than you would have gotten had, Floyd Mayweather not stiffed you on the deal anyway. But nonetheless, like, people steal these fights, okay? They steal them. And so whether people are interested in Jake Paul fighting or not, when it is done outside of a big organization, like this is now being demonstrated, like whether it's the pay-per-view infrastructure, whatever it is, if it's Jake Paul at the top of the bill, they're stealing it. They're not buying it, right? They're just not buying it. Okay. Now, does that mean that Jake Paul's not a big draw? Like, is that seriously? Like, so just taking this as an example, if Anderson Silva and Jake Paul bombed in the pay-per-view, does that mean that Jake Paul's not a big draw? Of course not. Of course that's not what it means. He's a huge draw. It means there's something wrong with the recipe. Okay, what's going on right? There's something wrong in the recipe. There's a rotten ingredient in this recipe, which is Jake Paul headlining boxing matches. Okay, and I'm going to be totally straight with you. I don't think that it's going to matter when it comes to Nate Diaz. I don't think you're going to see a huge jump in those numbers. Not because more people aren't interested, because I think the main problem is an astronomical number of people stealing it. Now Nate Diaz will drive bigger numbers, but let's say they do double what they did here. It's still not a very good night. There is I can't really say for sure what it is, but there's an ingredient in the bowl that is poison. That's poison to the Jake Paul thing being profitable, even though he's an enormous draw. Okay, so my opinion, you got to switch things up. You got to switch up how you're doing this. You can't just run the same play every single time and think that you're going to have a better outcome, right? So, look. Here's what I think. I think that you have a golden ticket gift on the table where Logan Paul and Andrew Tate want to fight each other in a mixed martial arts fight on a UFC card. They are asking for that. That's what they want. They want that fight, okay? Now, Dana and the UFC have been very resistant to sideshow type things, okay? Like they did the Brock Lesnar thing, but Brock Lesnar's a completely legitimate martial artist, obviously. He became the heavyweight champion. He was like a 300-pound all-American wrestler where like, okay, yeah, he's been in WWE doing fake shit, but like, do you think he's one of the last people on earth you'd ever want to fight? And it turned out for a little while, he's the last person on earth you wanted to fight because he's the heavyweight champion. Of course he was going to do well. Of course he was going to do well. My boy Frank Mir knee-barred him, though. I'm just saying. Frank Mir's a boss. But yeah, so you got that, right? You got the CM Punk thing, and that was a disaster, obviously. And I know Dana hated that he did that. And aside from those, you know what? Honestly, the Brock Lesnar thing is not a gimmick. He was a legit martial artist. CM Punk was kind of like Brock Lesnar, which is why it was a one-time mistake that Dana hasn't done again. Okay. But guess what? Everyone knows that Logan Paul is a legit wrestler. Like we all know that. Like he's trained with Paulo Costa. We've all seen the videos. Like it's not like he's going to go in there and look stupid. He boxed Floyd Mayweather to a draw, and we all know he can grapple. So it's not like he's a nobody. And Andrew Tate is a kickboxing champion. Okay? Like every fight in the UFC, it doesn't need to be a person that you think is going to go compete for the title. Like there can just be big fights. And Andrew Tate and Logan Paul check all the boxes, dude. That is that's a sideshow you can make because it doesn't like poison the whole thing, the whole UFC. So I don't know where the UFC sits on this, but I think for sure they should absolutely do that fight. And if you do that fight, it's going to be massive. And you're going to bring a bunch of new fans into the UFC. A bunch of these little twerps that like, dude, sometimes I go look at like this. I can't even remember the name of it, but it's a page and they get a shitload of views. Like someone was like, Jesse, this guy's like the PG rated version of you. He gets a shitload of views. It's like something project or something. I can't remember. And I looked and all he covers is like this, like the YouTuber shit, like, KSI and all that stuff. I'm like, damn, there are this many people interested in this, getting hundreds of thousands of views on every single video. So what that means is there's a big market there for the UFC to tap into. And so if they do the Logan Paul versus Andrew Tate fight, that's going to tap into a whole bunch of people who have never watched, who are not real UFC fans. Now you put them on the card, you'll get eyeballs. You put a bunch of other put 2 title fights on, tell the story well. So they're like, oh, then they remember and boom, you've converted them. They're UFC fans. Okay. So I think they should do that fight for sure. But what do you do with Jake Paul? Because Jake needs to switch something up. I'll tell you exactly what you do. I think you make, ready for it, Jake Paul against Conor McGregor in the UFC. That's what I would do. I would make that fight and I would make it in the UFC. You go, like Conor's huge right now. Conor's huge. It doesn't really matter what weight you do it at. I mean, Conor's he's got to be walking around at $185 right now, right? And so if Jake Paul can make $190, you got to fight, You got to fight. Now, you also could do Jake Paul against Nate Diaz in MMA, which might even be a better fight. At least it's a fight that I would say Jake has a better opportunity to win, because ultimately, as a matter of fact, you know what? Now that I'm thinking about it, you just do Nate versus Jake. You do Nate versus Jake, and you do it in MMA, and you do it in the UFC. Because that fight will sell 1 billion pay-per-views, and just like the Logan Paul and Andrew Tate one will. And look, Jake Paul just beat Anderson Silva. Jake Paul just starched Tyron Woodley. There's nothing about throwing Jake Paul into a mixed martial arts fight where you're like, it's just like some bullshit WWE shit. Fuck that. He just beat Anderson Silva. He just starched Tyron Woodley and beat him twice. He put Ben Askren into the pavement in fucking 30 seconds. He's not a legit fighter. So put him in the real octagon. Like Dana, Dana was like, oh, he's not going to do Anderson Silva. Okay, look, dude, like he did. He called your bluff. He fought Anderson Silva and he won. Well, guess what? You got a stable of fighters that'll fuck his shit up. All you have to do is get him to accept the right fight. But you're not going to get him into the UFC with like, oh, here, let's do you versus Izzy. Let's have you fight Jan Blachowicz at 205. I mean, like, obviously you got to get him in there with a fight that he feels confident he can win. So I think you do Nate Diaz in there. I think you bring Nate Diaz in, you do it at some weird weight, you do it in MMA, and after Jake wins or doesn't win, you assess what you're going to do next. But basically, Jake Paul's future has got to be in mixed martial arts, and if it's going to be in mixed martial arts, you got to do it in the UFC, dude. And you could get both Paul brothers right now, and those guys, I will guarantee you, are going to surprise you, dude. I will guarantee you they're going to surprise people. They're going to get in there. The UFC is going to give them favorable matchups against guys. Like, there are a lot of people who are like, unless you instigate it, are not going to grapple. There's a lot of fighters in the UFC that are not going to grapple. Okay. Like, I don't care what happens. If you put a dude in with Israel Adesanya, a guy who has absolutely no ground game at all, there is no way that Izzy is going to shoot on him. Now, I am not suggesting that Jake Paul against Izzy is a good matchup, of course. I'm just stating a fact, which is that there are lots of guys who are going to stand and fight no matter what, unless someone else instigates the grappling. Jake Paul can bang Obviously, he just beat Anderson Silva in a boxing match. The idea that he can't go into the UFC and have any chance of beating anyone is ludicrous. Stupid, as a matter of fact. And no one who's honest and is credible will say that he poses no risk to anyone. I'm not saying he would like run through a bunch of guys, but like if you're a primarily stand-up fighter and you're facing, Jake Paul right now, and you're telling me that like, with exceptions, obviously, but a middle to lower tier UFC fighter who's primarily stand-up, and you're facing Jake Paul, you're telling me that they're going in there completely, like they're not worried at all? Because that would be absurd. He just beat Anderson Silva in a boxing match. His hands are super dangerous. So anyway, that's what I would do. I would do Nate versus Jake in the UFC, and I would do Andrew Tate versus Logan in the UFC, and then boom. That solves everyone's problems. Okay, you get a bunch of new fans for the UFC. You get, both Andrew Tate and Logan make well-earned money. Jake is going to make much more money in the UFC than he is doing what he's doing now, clearly because no one's buying the fucking pay-per-views. And Nate, you give him a huge deal, and he gets what he wants too. That's what the fuck I would do. I'm here all week. Call me whenever you want me. I can do this strategy all day, you guys. I could solve everybody's problems, okay? And I could sell this being a good idea. Like, look, are you not sold? Are you not sold? Did I not convince you that that Jake Paul going to the UFC is a good idea for everybody? Because if I didn't, whatever. I sold myself. Love you guys. Oh, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And join the IRL group. And buy Sheath underwear. I love you guys. Peace.